Desmond Tutu once said, "Do your little bit of good where you are." Africa's global role is evolving. Its population is young. Cities expand. Critical minerals power the green transition. Digital innovation accelerates. But governance pressures and climate shocks persist. The question is not whether Africa matters, it is how it will shape the global order. Welcome to the panel, Africa, Today and Tomorrow.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for being here. For this session, we have a great group of speakers who actually do not need much of an introduction. I think you know them all. What we're going to do is that I'm going to speak for 2 or 3 minutes, just present the context, and then I'll ask each of the speakers to try to limit their intervention, as we have been trying all day, yesterday and today, to about 3 minutes. And because I see a lot of people in the audience who actually know at least as much as I do about Africa, and therefore I would really like to involve the audience in our discussion. So we'll do our best to limit our talk. Now, the title of this session is Africa, Today and Tomorrow. But I would like to start by talking about Africa of yesterday. I think it is important to know where Africa is starting from in order to be able to judge where we are today and where we could be tomorrow. And I have to say, that I am reading right now a book by Jos Sondwell that is called How Africa Works. This is the author of the book on how Asia works. And then Africans invited him and asked him to compare Asia and Africa. And he starts by saying there are really reasons why, if you look at Africa in 1960, at the time of decolonization, and compare it with Asia, there are objective reasons why Africa has been having such huge problems in development. Demography, that the country the population is spread all across the continent, and it's very difficult to bring services to them. And then there is what he called low-budget colonization. I like this term, low-budget colonization, which resulted in very few services in terms of health, education, infrastructure, compared to Asia. And the creation of countries with very artificial borders, where we have different ethnic groups in the same country, which takes a long time to create a nation out of that country, and especially if you're going to fight about resources, because many African countries are resource countries. No, but compared to that situation, actually, if you look at Africa today, a lot has been done. If you compare, for example, life expectancy at birth, the average in 1960 in Africa, it was 41 years. 41 years. Today it's 65 years. In 1960, the number that really struck me, in 1960, the rate of secondary school enrollment in Africa, and I'm talking about the whole continent, North and Sub-Saharan Africa, was 3 to 4%. Only 3 to 4% of African children in 1960 went to secondary school. Today, it's over 50%. So a lot has been achieved despite the low-budget colonization of Africa. So now, where are we today, and how is the situation in the world affecting Africa? There is the first impact of what is happening globally on Africa is a decline in financing. We see big cuts. Well, US aid is closed. Big cuts from the Europeans. Cuts of around $12 to $18 billion a year in their aid budgets. That is, and the argument is that we need the money for defense. And, that is impacting Africa right away, especially as it comes at a time when the continent is facing a debt crisis. You have nearly half of the countries in Africa today are either in debt distress or are at high risk of debt distress, according to the IMF's definition. So financing is impacting Africa. Climate change is impacting Africa, especially in terms of food security, in terms of big cities like Lagos, Abidjan, Alexandria, that are impacted by rising sea levels. I won't go into all the details, but you know that. At the same time, we see also in Africa a retreat in democracy, especially in the Sahel, with several coups d'etat. We see Africans walking away from the West and more and more reliance on Russian support. We also, maybe on our television screens, the discussion between the United States President Trump and the President of South Africa. We see the US attacks in northern Nigeria. So Africa is being impacted by what's happening. And if we look at all of the country, what is the reaction now? And I think I'll tell you just a quick anecdote and I'll stop. I was in Nigeria 3 months ago, and in a meeting where there were two heads of state. And they both told me, listen, maybe President Trump is doing us a favor, and that now we should really be more self-reliant. And instead of relying on trade with the North, let us rely on Northern support financing. Let us now rely on ourselves. And you see that, I'm saying there are two heads of states who are telling me that. I was talking to young people at the universities in Ibadan, in Nigeria, who said the same thing. So there is this push in Africa for more self-reliance, and I think maybe my colleagues are going to talk about it, but the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is one example of that desire for self-reliance. So let me stop here. I wanted just to put this context in out there, and I'll move right away to Charles Michel, who we all know was president of the European Council and Prime Minister of Belgium.
Thank you. But since I'm not coming from Africa, I feel a bit embarrassed to be the first to take the floor on Africa. But I will follow the suggestion. No, Africa is a fundamental and very important continent for the European Union, and it's not a surprise. And I remember a few years ago, together with Macky Sall, at that time, Macky, you were president of the African Union, and at that time, I was president of the European Council. We had a great summit, a great meeting, because together, the African friends and the European friends, we had the ambition to reset the relationship between Africa and the European Union, based on some very obvious principles. First, we want to develop a relationship based on the principle of equality. We want a sincere mutual understanding, a sincere mutual respect, point one. Point two, we are absolutely convinced, and I'm convinced, that development aid is one thing, and it could be helpful in some circumstances, But probably the most important challenge everywhere, including in Africa, is how we are in a position to unleash the vast potential through the private sector and through private investments. And that's why we've tried to use, for instance, the European Investment Bank as a powerful tool in order to facilitate those investments and to encourage the private sector to dare to invest on the African continent. Point three, I sincerely think that there are vast resources in Africa, and there is a prospect to mobilize more in the future those vast resources. And for instance, I'm a strong supporter of this continental trade agreement. You know that the African Union has expressed the ambition to try to work in order to integrate further the African continent from a trade point of view. And everyone understands very well that if this is put into practice, it will represent a vast opportunity in terms of more capabilities, more means, more opportunities for the development of this African continent. I don't underestimate the challenges, because Africa is a big continent, more than 50 countries, a lot of inhabitants all across those countries, all across those cities. And maybe the regional integration through the regional organizations could be also a very practical leverage. There's an experience that we had in Europe when we started with Benelux to launch this economic project, and it can be a very interesting engine. And finally, because I would like to respect the 3 minutes you kindly gave to me, one comment on peace and security. Today, we face all across the world a difficult situation in terms of armed conflicts, in terms of wars. But it's absolutely clear that, including in Africa, there are serious challenges. You've mentioned the Sahel region and the coup d'etat and the armed conflict because of those terrorist groups active in that region. By the way, probably with a disruptive role played by some external actors. I have Russia in mind, to be very clear, and the role played by Russia is a very effective business model. I don't like it, but I have to observe how the Russians are able to fuel a certain frustration, legitimate frustration, but to fuel it and to make some relationships more difficult, especially with some European countries. We see in Sudan a tragedy, and we don't speak so much. Unfortunately, I regret the situation about the tragedy and the human tragedy in Sudan. And for decades, there is this war in the eastern part of the DRC, and despite all the efforts, we're observing that it's difficult to fix this issue and to bring more stability. And I end here, I think we have also to trust the African leaders and the African people to fix those issues and to bring the solutions. And I think that external partners could be helpful and could assist if there is a plan, if there is a strategy fixed by the African leaders. And here I would like to make a comparison with 2 different examples. I remember a few years ago, I was with other Europeans involved in trying to support the efforts of the G5 Sahel to try to help those countries to fight against the terrorist group. And honestly, we cannot say that it was a successful approach when we see the state of play today in terms of security in that region. But there's another example, more interesting in my opinion, is what we did together with Rwanda and some other SADC countries, for instance, in Mozambique. Mozambique was also a country facing terrorist groups, and in that case, we didn't follow the similar approach that we had followed in the Sahel region. We decided to trust the local representatives and the local actors, and we decided to trust by helping them with the means they needed to counter those terrorist groups. And I don't say that everything is now perfect in that region, but it was much more successful if I'm comparing with the situation in the Sahel region. That's, in my opinion, a lesson. And we should, I think, learn the lesson, because we all know that if you repeat systematically the same behavior, you should not be surprised that you get the same result. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And since I've been following both the Sahel and Mozambique, you are absolutely right. I see the big difference. By the way, Joseph, I have to tell you that in the World Bank, Malta is considered to be part of North Africa. So, so please, the floor is yours.
That's often told to me. Actually, geographically, it makes sense because Malta is southwards of Tunisia. If you look at it from a geographical point of view, Tunis is north of Malta, but Tunis is considered part of Africa and we're considered part of Europe. So that's some map fun facts for you. And actually, I feel a little bit at ease at discussing this subject because I believe that culturally, all the countries in the Mediterranean have a uniting force. And I love to speak of Mediterranean rather than Africa and Europe because I think that the Mare Nostrum, the White Sea, is a unifying factor. What I believe, and I agree with Charles, that it's almost embarrassing for us to be here on a panel discussing Africa when we are outsiders to this. But definitely, I think the attitude we can adopt is to show our mistakes, show our successes, and try to offer a blueprint on how things might be done. And I do agree with both of you when you said that the biggest opportunity for Africa lies in Africa itself, as in the internal market, which ourselves in Europe have been working on for decades now, and is still an unfinished business, and it still has great potential. Still, it has been the biggest engine of economic growth, social mobility, and really and truly cohesion within our continent. And I believe that is the biggest opportunity that Africa has. It's not, trying to please or trying to dance to the agenda, whether of the United States, China, or Europe, but it's really and truly is taking the reins of this huge opportunity. I will give only one example. I was in Morocco some months back, and I had a very interesting discussion with a lady who comes, I believe, from Nigeria, and she runs part of the business for Air Gabon. And she was explaining to me the huge difficulties that there are for African airlines to land in each other's airports. She basically was telling me that in order to do the shortest of trips, there are the biggest of bureaucracies and the biggest of barriers. And just saying that, just looking at, a sort of open skies agreement within Africa, which I know there is a discussion upon, I do believe that in itself would make a huge difference in the lives of people, would increase mobility, would bring about a lot of economic prosperity. In many ways, if one says Africa's future is in Africa itself, it sounds like isolationists in attitude. But it's really and truly a very globalist approach, because the first step towards globalism, I believe, is a Pan-African approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joseph. And actually, a lot has been said today and yesterday about the importance of regional organization and regional support in this new world order. So yes, it makes a lot of sense. Dimitris, you are not African either, but you were the European Commissioner who had to work a lot with Africa. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It is true that I discovered Africa during my tenure as European Commissioner, where I had to cope with the most difficult issue of that time, the year 2015, which was migration, the first uncontrolled migrant flows to Europe, and so it's the very first terrorist attacks. Charles Michel was the president of the Commission at the time. We shared a lot of thoughts on how to cope with this situation. But it was not only migration. You know, things have changed. In this year, 2026, Africa is no longer a peripheral player. It is the world's most significant demographic and economic frontier. And we have to see Africa with great respect. I was saying, meeting African leaders, that what Africa needs from Europe is not aid, it is respect. And this is something that has to do also with the past. Unfortunately, both in Africa and in Europe, there are people who are fully influenced by the past, what happened before. Another point, we shouldn't see Africa in the way the colonial powers we are seeing in the past. Things have changed. Africa does not come from the future, as it is very usually said. It is here. And we need to establish strong and deep partnerships. Europe, but also the United States of America. Now, the landscape is very well known. China is there. Other stakeholders in the region. So they all want to establish strong partnerships with Africa. And now let's go deeper within the African reality. The African reality is as we know it. There are still gaps in the area of democratic governance by many of these countries. The second is that some of them, they are deeply corrupt. Africa, unfortunately, is not united. In the European Union, we had tried to establish a dialogue with Africa with a quite big success. African Union and the European Union have decided to work together in the future, but Africa is still divided. So one of the main purposes right now is how to see Africa more united at all levels. Africa is the richest part of the world, richer than the United States or even Europe and other parts of the world, but it has not been exploited by the Africans themselves. There are leaders in Africa. I have met some of them, and some of them, they are here right now. Wise people, modest people. They want to put aside whatever divides Africa, but it needs a lot of work. The post-independence period, largely after 1960s, was marked, as you know, by the Cold War. The Cold War had left its marks, where African nations were often, we have to admit it, pawns in the hands and under the control of the big powers. But things have changed. So I come back to what I said before. The mindset has to change both in Europe, in the United States and elsewhere, especially when they have to deal with Africa as a union, but on the other hand, as a continent that can contribute in order to make this world better. Migration, I finish with that as an introductory remark. It is the moment for the Europeans to understand that we need migrants. Europe is an aging continent. We said that demographically, Africa is booming. 1 in 5 citizens of the world in the years to come will be African. On the other hand, we need a workforce. And where can we find them? The ones who want to cross the borders and to come to Europe, they come because they want to work here. So we have to open legal pathways. This is the answer to migration. Dear friends, we live in the era of human mobility. Right now, we are here, more than 350 million people around the world want to go somewhere. They want to move somewhere else. And unfortunately, still today, the European Union is not fully prepared for that. At that time, I remember, and I think it was Mr. Muscat was the Prime Minister of Malta, we have decided to convene an extraordinary meeting of leaders of the world in Malta to address migration. At the same time, I had suggested to Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General, to convene an extraordinary assembly in the United Nations. They were both very successful. A lot of leaders were there, but what was the outcome? We still have not adopted a global agenda on migration, and Africa is on the spotlight for that. So with respect, with measures yet, with legal pathways, we can make migration a tool for progress and a tool of cooperation between Europe and Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dimitris. No, thank you very much, Dimitris. Thank you for putting the issue of migration on the table. I think it is very, very important to discuss. Now, I've moved to Ahmedou, who actually knows all of Africa, West and East. And please, sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Il faut appuyer le microphone.
Thank you very much. First, a number of figures. The continent is 60%, the African continent is 60% of the Earth's surface. It is 20% of the emerged Earth, which means 30.5 million kilometers square. 30.5 million kilometers square. I'd like to start by figures because it helps me understand later or make a point. This makes Africa number 3 after America and so on. The population is 1.3 billion. It makes it the second after Asia. And Africa is 17.2% of world population. But on national average, it is 51 person by kilometer square in 54 countries. Therefore, it is only 17.2% of world population. And other dimension on Africa, it is more than 34% of least developed countries, and they are 48 countries. 48 least developed countries, 34 are in Africa. The GDP, gross domestic product, in Africa in 2014 is 3,513 US dollar. Worldwide, it is 14,956. So it is almost 1/3 of the population. Africa's share in world economy is 2%, and mostly for export of domestic product. So these figures should help me understand or help my conclusion or my observation. In the continent, we face a number of difficult problems. Strong demography, not because we are overpopulated, but the organization of the state, and especially urban and rural population. Fast-growing urbanization. Most capital house 22 to 28% of the national population. So, in addition, they are almost cities within countries. Politically, in Africa, we are probably the only continent where still the Cold War mentality of one-party system is prevalent, despite appearances of democratization. So the culture of one party, dangerous because you cannot think outside, is deeply rooted. And it is at the same time difficult because the new technology help people, citizens, even who never spent time in school, to be connected to our conference here, to the debate in the World Bank or General Assembly. And the leadership is not paying attention to that technology revolution. They need, therefore, a need of mental, cultural revolution of the leadership, not political, but the elite itself. More importantly, to stop a combat for, it is very important because African in general, we like very much to have national unity, meaning from Casablanca to Cape Town. It is huge. And from Dakar to Djibouti, from east to west. How about thinking sub-regional organization and linking them, but to have a central government, whereas the former Central Europe, Soviet Union, have European Union themselves, started by 6, 8, 12, 28, now 27. In Africa, we'd like it now, immediately. Is it helpful? I'm not convinced. So there is an important today where the culture of one-party system is important, but the world is connected, and most young people, people around 20 to 28 are 65% of our population in Africa. They are connected. You cannot run them looking backward, colonization, racism, slavery, one-party system. We have to look ahead. And it is not easy. There's the need for a mental, cultural revolution. More importantly, there is a need to fight for national economic integration, sub-regional integration, and to be moderate on immediate integration. As I mentioned, to see what happened in Europe, in Asia, and so on. So the conclusion for me is, yes, for solidarity with Africa. We are, in part, threatened by insecurity. Officially, it is religious. When it comes to religion, it is difficult to have an opinion, but I served many years as UN Special Representative in Somalia, traveling to Yemen, Sudan, Libya, and Afghanistan. I find out, and it is not a scientific conclusion, that most those who are fighting terrorists are very good, excellent in illegal trade. So it helps avoid paying custom, taxes, and there is a lot of traffic in cigarettes, in migrant, in the drug, and so on. So is it religious or it is a business? If it is a business, it cannot stop. There is no more UN in Somalia, no more American troops in Afghanistan, and the fighting is still. Is it business? I'm asking you a question. Is it business? Is it terrorism? I think I have 36 minutes. And so, yes, in Africa for solidarity. As a Mauritanian, also we are Arabs, and we have a League Arab since '48. So, solidarity is good diplomatically, but economically, you have to fight. Ancient. So, sub-regional organization, looking ahead and not backward, should be, in my opinion, will lead. So thank you very much, and thanking Azerbaijan for organizing, but also for the efficiency. Beautiful street, clean, safe, renovated building, efficient airport. It could be an example in some of our countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ahmedou. Especially, you made 2 points. That one is that Africa is actually, if you look at the data in terms of square kilometers and the number of the population, Africa is not overpopulated. Africa population is not dense by any stretch of the numbers. However, if you look at African cities and the way urbanization is happening in Africa, that is a big problem. And the second point that you made that was very important is sub-regional organizations. I ask myself a lot, what is ECOWAS doing? What is COMESA doing? What is SADC doing? Those are our sub-regional organizations. What is the role today? Now, Hakima, I'm always happy to be on the same panel with you because you're a strong voice for African women. So please go ahead.
Thank you so much. It's very difficult to speak after these gentlemen. They said everything. And more difficult to speak before President Macky Sall. For me, he's the voice of Africa. I'm very happy to be here, and I want to pay tribute to Nizami Center, the Secretariat, and especially to Roshan, and also to congratulate all of you, all of us, for being here in this challenging time. So thank you. I would like to bring another perspective of Africa. I'm not saying that I don't agree with what was said, but I'm seeing Africa in a different way and with different perspectives. I will remind 3 points which are very important, and it was said. Mr. Ghanem said the population, yes, demographic is important, and I'm seeing it like the opportunity of Africa. In 2050, 1 out of 4 humans will be Africans. So this is the opportunity of Africa. It will depend on the capacity of the African leaders to manage the shock of demography. The second point, we should not forget worldwide that Africa holds 30% of minerals resources. What is requested and is indispensable to power the energy transition, not only in Europe, but worldwide. This is very important. And the third point is digital innovation. Africa will take benefit of the digital innovation to overpass decades of development, which normally took centuries to be achieved. And you said that all our youth, our leaders are connected today, and technology is spreading in Africa. Now, we used to perceive Africa as a raw material exporter. Africa, for centuries or decades, based its commerce and its revenues on extractions and migration. Yes, but today, the mindset, as Dimitris said, is changing. Africa wants today to develop and to industrialize itself on the soil of Africa for the benefit of Africans. We used to export 90% of our minerals and our resources with a very little added value for our companies and our population. And this mindset is changing now. And the key word is diversification. If I heard many times competitions between China, United States. No, this is not competitions. Africans now are choosing their partners because they are looking and seeking for partners that are respecting them, treating them equally and treating them reciprocity in, based on reciprocity in their agreement. So we are working together or partnering together with the Gulf region in terms of renewable energy, with China infrastructure, with the United States security and digital innovation, with Europe in finance and climate change. So Africa is not asking, the Africans today are not asking themselves who will invest in us, but with whom we will partner in an equal and win-win basis. This is the new philosophy of the African leaders. I agree with you, Ghanem, when you told about the problems and the challenges facing Africa. But don't forget, Africa is not moving forward as one. There are regions in Africa that are moving very faster than the others with confidence, and we have some corridors of insecurity. Regions are more fragile, like what is happening in the Sahel region. And when you are talking about the averages, I don't like this. We are not yet, like European Union, integrated. Our economy was some years ago around 15% integration. Now with the new trade zone, we aim to reach 52% by 2030. So taking the averages will be wrong, because you are taking into account the least countries and you are taking into account the Sahel. So, and this leads me to tell you about the continental order that will be the future of Africa. I'm not seeing it as a complete integrated order, but I'm seeing it as a continental coordination between regions in Africa on issues that matter for all of them, like managing a critical policy for our minerals, climate change, finance, etc. So yes, indeed, if we stick to this old narrative, which is, yes, Africa needs aid of development, Africa needs finance. No, Africa needs to rely on itself, and believe me, the world needs Africa, but Africa needs the world also. So we need to negotiate, for example, in climate change. Climate change, Africa has no responsibility about CO2 emissions. We are not responsible, but we are not receiving finance. And this is the responsibility of the biggest emitters of this world. We are receiving 3% of the climate finance, and this is not fair. So what Africa is looking for is justice, respect, reciprocity in terms of commerce, and also we need to work on 4 or 5 levels. First, to reinforce our institutions, we need more transparent institutions and more democratic institutions, and I think that our leaders are aware about the gaps we have in Africa. We need to build more credibility, to attract more finance. We need to work on innovation. We need to work on infrastructure to accelerate the implementation of the Continental Free Trade Zone project. But Africa is moving step by step, and I am very proud to say that I have heard leaders from Africa changing completely the narrative. And when you are talking about migrants, thank you. You said that Europe, we need migrants, but we will need our people to stay in Africa. These will be the engineers of the industries we want to build. These will be the workers of the industries we want to build in Africa. So if Africa is offering the perspective for the youth, and if Europe is playing the game of being the win-win partner, then our youth will stay in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Hakima. Of course, you are right that we have different countries do, different regions doing differently. But I'm an economist. I'm used to using averages. I am sorry. But I also would like to thank you because other than me, you also focused on climate change, which I think is a key issue for Africa. We've got 25 minutes and 48 seconds left. I'm really proud of all the panelists. So we'll go to the floor, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes left after the discussion with the floor so that each one of you can give his or her concluding remarks. Let me move to the floor right away. Is there somebody with a microphone? And I want to start with Madam the Senator from Kenya, who just arrived. And I'll give you the floor, and then there's the lady behind you afterwards. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I was still preparing my question. I really want to commend Madam Hakima and Ahmedou, and they asked seriously, especially Ahmedou, a vital question, that when they're using the countries when they're fighting, is it the illegal trade that they're covering themselves from? I look at a country like DRC. It's one of the richest countries, in the world, I would say, in Africa, as African country, yet it is very poor. And I don't know why most of the African countries actually are, my heart, I'm really trying to explore because it really goes down. And Hakima, I think, said it all, that Africa is able to carry themselves. Of course, you need other countries. Right now, there's so much hunger for Africa because they have the minerals, they have everything, they have that they're able to stand by themselves, with infrastructure and everything. But then yet, Africa will still need, other countries for support. So I think this is what we need to explore more on how do we do it. Look at a country like South Sudan itself. Look at what they're going through now. And it's one of the richest, of course. The minerals that they carried so far. Right now, it's in bad shape. But then looking at all the countries that, go through, have all the minerals, but then they would still go through the quagmires. I'm still trying, of course, to understand, and I would want to hear more. I love what I'm seeing. At least we have fourth president, Macky Sall, and I'm hoping that he'll say something about it because he was sitting on the throne in Africa, and I'm sure he's going to share with us, the issues that we have. In Kenya also, of course, we go through the same. And I know right now we have discovered more minerals. Of course, we have it in Turkana. We have so much gold, and oil is coming up, though it's told in hush-hush. And the people behind it are squeezing it. The people who know about it are not talking about it. But I think also Kenya, I would say right now, we are facing that, and we are one of the richest. But then we need to rediscover ourselves and not reinvent the wheel. Thank you.
Senator, there's the lady right behind. And thank you for mentioning Sudan, because actually it breaks my heart. I'm Egyptian, so Sudan is very close to my heart, and I work there a lot. And maybe we can talk about Sudan later.
I am also Egyptian, and I want to thank Madam Hakima for what she said. She tried to be balanced, the poor and the contra. But we have to admit that the African Union is very proactive, and the African treaty bodies are very interactive and very down to earth with realities in the African continent. Despite the legal framework of the African Union, huge violation of human rights are rampant in Africa. Female genital mutilation, to mention only one exercise, child labor. The African Convention on Human and People's Rights are literally not implemented. So a whole infrastructure of treaty bodies and conventions are not really implemented. I heard that Africa doesn't need aid but needs respect. Actually, respect is never given. You earn respect. And I think I'm an African, and I give myself the liberty to make some self-criticism. We need to be true to the conventions that we as African countries have ratified. And we need to support African treaty bodies which really are exercising the maximum to their mandate. So the so-called cultural practices is a huge violation to human rights. Transparency needs a lot to be done. The people's participation in the decision-making is not the best. That's why I think Africa is suffering the most from coup d'etat and change of regimes by force. We have to honor the obligations, such as Africa 2063 is a great document, but if we are, how can I say, fair, the implementation leaves a lot to be desired. So we as Africans must be true to ourselves, and we must earn the respect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is the lady right next to you, and then there is our co-chair.
I don't want to speak before the wise man of Egypt, Ismail Serageldin.
No, please do, please do, please do.
Mila Popovic, good to be here with you. This is a very, very important topic, not because it's a whole continent, right, in question, but that the world right now is going through a civilizational shift, and we are standing at to be or not to be between, on one hand, having existential risks intensifying, multiplicative, and accelerating. And on the other hand, we have the grand convergence of technologies, different grades of AI, synthetic biology, nanotechnology, longevity or transhumanism all together. This is a true Scylla and Charybdis between which we find ourselves. Now, it is scientifically proven that we're not going to make it without African leadership through climate change. There's nothing that is going to happen to save our world if Africa doesn't save us. There is a shift that needs to happen in the way we approach Africa. Madam Hakima, I want to honor, and Madam from Kenya, to honor your input. Help me to help you. We have come to that place, and we need to see Africa differently and orient ourselves towards African leadership differently. And the second half of this equation, this is the AI, or should we say, conscious technology era. And there as well, we're not going to do anything that is ethical, ecological, or conscious without African genius. There is no collective intelligence without the African genius. So in other words, this is my call. This is a food for thought, but this is also my call to the entire forum to orient ourselves properly, and also a call to the African leaders of the African nations. Be the leaders of this grand civilizational transition, because without the African collective intelligence, youth power, and neuroplasticity, none of us are going to make it.
Thank you very much. And I fully agree that Africa must take the leadership on climate change. And now, the wise man from Egypt.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colleagues, I am Egyptian, so I'm also African. Also, I worked for many, many years in the World Bank, Africa, including with our current chair of the panel. We worked together there. I would like to raise three things related to the issue of Africa, and I would like someone from the panel to respond. First, there has been a study that shows very clearly that of all the places in the world that are affected most by climate change, Africa, in terms of droughts and floods and so on, is having very severe problems. And I believe we organized a issue of food security in Kigali a couple of years ago on that issue. So that issue is very, very real. Secondly, it is true that after all, we talk about the continent. The continent has enormous variety, 54 countries, each of which has its own specificities and cultural and political realities, and therefore generalizations are always very dangerous. But by and large, I would say that the World Bank did a study on fragility and said the fragility of regimes is closely associated with inability to cope with resilience for climate change problems that occur, and we're most susceptible to these problems. And in relation to that fragility, we notice so many conflicts are going on in Africa. You mentioned Sudan, but it's not only just Sudan, South Sudan, North Sudan, so Darfur, then you have Mali, Niger, etc. You have in Ethiopia, you have Tigray, there are so many of these conflicts, Congo, and so on and so forth. I could go on for many other examples. The question, therefore, is of governance. Why is it that we, in spite of the fact having some fairly good activist regional organizations, ECOWAS being one of them, of course, has shown an effort to try to deal with its member states in a most effective way, and the African Union has tried in more than one occasion and so on. But I've kind of, when I hear that we are going to send Kenyan peacekeepers to Haiti, I say, well, you know, I mean, I'm happy that somebody is going to try to help Haiti, but you know, we got a lot of things closer to home in Africa going on right now, where we could bring in some peacekeeping and some proper organization. So it seems to me that while talking about climate change and about technology and about economics and so on, it's very important. The issue of governance. And do we have a proper mechanism? Do you see possibilities for this younger generation of Africans to really participate in a way that helps shape the continent? It is still the youngest continent, by and large, in terms of demographics. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ismail. Could you, Ismail, could you give your, just to the Prime Minister here? Thank you.
Thank you. Africa has been to the core of my heart and interest for a long time. When I stepped down as Prime Minister, I made a foundation called the Oslo Center, and we have now our headquarters in Nairobi, working on democracy assistance in Africa, and we have also been to Somalia. I have to tell Ahmedou, we were there trying to assist the Speaker of the Parliament and leaders of the standing committees in Parliament to get democracy gradually to function after many years of civil war.
There was a Somali,
but
Somalia's president was
I have
Norwegian.
one specific question, and that has been addressed here, because we know that many of the conflicts in Africa, some African countries, are along ethnical lines. Ethnicity is a conflict dimension in several African countries. Of course, in Somalia, where it has been almost impossible to found political parties that are multi-ethnical. The parties are following ethnical lines. And in Kenya also, where you have had many conflicts because of ethnicity. So my question to the panel is, maybe to Ahmedou, because this is a hindrance for a more positive development in several African countries. Ethnic conflict is an hindrance, avoiding a more positive development. So what can be done to build more bridges across ethnicity, across the ethnic lines, so to open up for the potential of development that you have in these countries in Africa?
No, thank you very much. That's a very important question. I wanted to say that when I was working on Somalia, the president of Somalia was actually a Norwegian national. Yeah, at the time. Oh, the president of Somalia was actually a Norwegian national at the time. Yes, Avramopoulos. They were all Norwegians, and that's the time when Somalia was doing very well. But the issue that you raise is really very important about how can you create a nation out of the different ethnicities. And some people raise the question of why can't we just redraw the borders? So these are very, very difficult questions. I think I saw a hand. Here you are, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Frank O'Donnell. I worked for 30 years in the United Nations, and my first 12 years were spent in Africa, various different countries. But I want to mention something that's close to the heart, I think, of Ahmedou Ould-Abdallah. It's the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, an international organization of, at current, I think it's about 50 members. And Mauritania is one of the members. So is the Democratic Republic of Congo and some others. And it is all about the governance of the extractive industries. There's a very good report about the gender dimension of extractive governance, which I recommend. And some other countries are also members, but not my own, unfortunately. Ireland is not, the United Kingdom is, Germany is, France is not, China is not, and the United States is not. And this organization is a little bit like the ILO. It has three main dimensions, but rather than labor and trade unions and so on, it's the member countries, the companies involved in the extractive industry, and civil society. And by working together, they try to ensure good governance and fiscal transparency, and that the money of the extractive industries stays largely in the country to the benefit of the people. Now, the European Union is involved with its global gateway in a new extractive route from Congo all the way to the Atlantic coast. I would like to see the global gateway take into account the principles and the standards of the EITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And please give the microphone to the lady over here. She's been raising her hand for a long time. Stand up so that they can see you. But you are right, EITI, when I was in Nigeria, when I worked in Nigeria, Nigeria joined EITI. And it was important in those days.
Okay, so my name is Antje Herberg, and I just came back from serving on the African continent for the European Union, where I was both in the DRC and in Niger, so in the Sahel zone. And so, of course, I have a question to my former super boss, Charles Michel. And I would like just to ask this question, is that, you interpreted, for example, the events in Sahel as being externally driven by actors such as possibly Russia or others. But could it not be that maybe this was also the start of a second decolonialization movement? And could we not also imagine that there is also some sort of epochal change on the African continent, where African leaders are seriously considering their own interest in engaging with other partners, and would like to have their full freedom of maneuver in how they shape their own interests? And related to the previous questions, I would like to ask also, maybe we have, as Europeans, also our lessons to learn from the way of how we engage with the many countries of the African continent, because it's not just one country, right? and whether there is actually a serious consideration about how to do that. We speak about eye-to-eye partnership. Of course it's eye-to-eye, but what does that really concretely mean?
Excellent question. Actually, I was asking myself the same question about what's happening in the Sahel. So, I mean, wasn't it one way of putting your question, wasn't it the way that Europe and the West were behaving that opened the space for others to come in? I think that is a very valid question. Anybody else from the floor? And I'm looking at President Macky Sall. There is somebody there.
Yes, I'm Peter Galbraith. I wanted to follow up on Prime Minister Bundevik's question and ask about Somaliland. I'm not approving at all of the Israeli recognition, but the fact is it's been de facto independent for over 30 years. And it's not impossible to change the borders. In that time, in fact, the borders of Sudan were changed with South Sudan becoming independent, and the borders of Ethiopia were changed with Eritrea becoming independent. Is there a point at which, after more than 30 years, it's time to say, well, it isn't really one country anymore, and we should accept that result?
Thank you. Anybody else? Monsieur le Président, vous voulez rien dire? So could you bring the mic to the first row here?
Thank you very much, dear Hafez, and thank you for all the panelists. Today I selected to be listening what people are talking about Africa instead of bringing my point of view. Because as you said, Africa is so big, a big continent, big population, not excessive population, I agree with you. The problem we have is the problem of urban development in Africa. Because what we have since the colonial time was from Europe, they came around the coast and they developed the capital around the coast. And all the model was to export goods from inland, the coast, and to Europe. So we try now to reverse that perception and to go inland. When we go inland the continent, I think the government have to develop more urbanity, more activities for jobs also, for the people, to avoid migration. Because the migration start on each country, from rural to the capital, and from the capital now to Europe or to America or to somewhere else. Africa needs win-win partnership. I don't believe on public aid. I don't believe on public aid because since 70 years now, we are getting public aid, but when we see the impact is absolutely very insignificant. I'm not criticizing the people who are doing the aid, but it's a so small amount of money compared to what we need for our development that it is not the way to go. The way to go is to see how to get Africa involved in the financial market on the right, on the right way. That means how we can borrow money, paying maybe, we can pay twice, but not 5 times what the others are paying. Or the reality today is when we go to the market, because of the perceptions of the risk in Africa, we are paying 5 times more than what the Europeans are paying or others. So if we are today in debt stress, that's because of the system, how it works, how the credit rating agencies are giving the rating to Africa, because just the perception is it is a risky continent. Africa is not risky. Africa is paying his debt. Africa certainly have challenges of security, of course, but we are trying to fix that. I remember when Libya was destroyed in 2011, we started to have this massive migration, because before that, Libya was a fence. But when they destroyed it, all the young coming from Africa, from the Sahel, they are moving to Europe. At the same time, the terrorism left Syria, Middle East, and came to Libya and go to Sahel. So we are facing to development. At the same time, we are facing to terrorism, and the Security Council, since 15 years, we are advocating, asking for more support to fight against terrorism. Still now we are continuing to ask that. So too many challenges, but we are very positive, and we believe that Africa can be a solution for the rest of the world. Solution on giving energy. It can be proper energy, it can be hydrogen, it can be gas or oil, but also Africa is giving biodiversity. Africa is giving oxygen because of the Congo basin and all what we can bring to the global civilization. And we have the youth, we have the energy, we just need the capital to transform this wonderful potential in Africa, to give jobs for the Africans, and to be part of the global trade, and to be a real partner. It is what we need. Not only all time Africa is disease, Africa is war. You have war everywhere. It is not the African specialty. And just to finish, I want to appreciate what our colleagues say. Africa has certainly ethnicity problem, but today is not so very important in Africa, because since the independence, we try to build nations on each single countries. The problem are more today with terrorism or access to resources than a tribal problem or an ethnicity problem. Of course, it is a reality in certain countries, but we should build our peace in the continent. I just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Now, we have run out of time, but if you let me, I think we had a lot of very interesting comments and questions from the floor, and I know that actually there are some of you that I would like to call on to say something, but I won't. I will leave the panelists have the right to at least respond to everything that they heard, and I will start with reverse order. So I start from Hakima first, and Charles, you'll be last to close the session.
Thank you. I will maybe emphasize on 2 points. And I will remind President Macky Sall that he forgets something very important. He used to tell in each of his speech, Africa needs a voice in the Security Council. And for me, that's a very, very important point, because we need to be heard. Now I will come back to what President Macky Sall concerning the conflict in Africa. If you look at the history of the military coups in Africa, you will see that each 20 years we have a military coup somewhere in maybe Mali, Burkina Faso. It was 5 or 6 since the 68th. If you look at the military coups since 2020, you will see that we have each year one military coup. One year we had 2 military coups in Burkina Faso, one in one. So, and this, we should look at the specificity of each situation and understand why. Why? It's because, and Mr. President explained what happened in Libya. In Libya, not only the Islamists were to the Sahel, the guns also were to the Sahel. The military guns were in the Sahel. So we need to understand the context of each country and to understand why we have the problem. And the second, and sometimes, and this is very important to our partners in Europe, sometimes the problems are happening and we are not part of them, where Africa has no responsibility in this problem. When the Libyan leader was killed, Africa has nothing to do with that, but the consequences were felt in the Sahel region, and we are still living the same problem in the Sahel region, in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in all of them are experiencing violence. The second point I want to answer to is climate change. Yes, and Mr. President said the risk perceived is high, so the rate we are loaning the money to Africa is very high. Sometimes it's 5 times, more than 5 times. And I will maybe, and Mr. President was advocating in the EU that we review the debt of Africa and we review the perception of the risk. And it's why it's very important, and I emphasize on this, as Africans, we should not communicate on this narrative of a high risk. The narrative has changed, and this is the reality. Come to Morocco, for example. If you come, we have no oil, we have no gas, and come and see the development in Morocco. So don't, and no country in Africa is safe. No country in the world now is safe. We know all what is happening and what challenging world we are living. So the risk is very overestimated to loan the Africans, and this is the problem. We lack investment. The second point, when it comes to oil and gas, Europe, for example, will not put a single euro on oil today. And if you look at the consumption of oil now in Europe and in the United States, it's in constant increase. So it doesn't mean, so we don't understand why, for the Africans now, not only in oil, also in gas. In Europe, gas is an energy for transition, energy transition. In Africa, gas is considered as a fossil fuel by the European banks. Go to the International European Bank, the Investment European Bank, to ask for a loan for gas. Nobody will give you 1 single euro. So I think that even our partners in Europe should revise the policies and consider that Africa needs its chance, and the consequences will be good for the Europeans.
Thank you very much, Hakima. And I would remind the panelists they can look at the clock. So we're working in overtime. Ahmedou.
Well, thank you. I think most of the response will be after the session when we have private discussions. Just two observations, and we discuss Somalia later. Once again, I would like to insist on my main point. It is very dangerous to speak of Africa as a single entity. It is a huge continent. There is diversity. Please. And second, from 1960 to 85, national unity was the theme. Since democratization, I personally, from the UN, from the World Bank, from my own country, saw implosion of national feeling. Instead of going to unity, we divided ourselves, and we cannot keep saying it is the colonization of an unfair economy. And I'm happy you mentioned Somalia. Same religion, same language, same geographical continuity. Yes, they had a war, but it stopped officially in 94. Why does it continue? Like in Yemen, like in Afghanistan. Why I'm saying it? Again, it is not scientific, but for more a conflict lasts, it becomes a business for the leadership. And this is my concern in the Sahel. And when you mention Gaddafi, the third invasion in the Sahel were Gaddafi. Should not forget it. Then when he was attacked, the 2 African members of Security Council didn't vote against. We cannot just take the positive side of Africa and forget our neutral or whatever side. Everything is on internet. African, they didn't vote against. And it was 2 major African countries. I was there. So we have to think of ourselves, stop blaming the others at internet era. Now, Sudan. I went with Kofi Annan and Ban Ki-moon. I was their special envoy to Sudan. I saw al-Bashir. I said, South Sudan, yes, is a Christian. But Christians are only 2%, even less. The others have no religion. So, but they have oil, they have wood, they have the 2 Nile, blue and white. Keep it together. No, they have to be Muslim. The outcome, South Sudan independent, Sudan is imploding, and the region is contaminated. My point, leadership, management is the best solution. But to look backward and to blame foreigners have to intervene. It is their business. You know, at my age, if someone told me to jump from here, I was asking them to help me get down. Why should I jump? So leadership is the same. So, Mr. President, stopping here, we have to think responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ahmedou. And now, Dimitris.
Thank you. I was taking notes of the remarks made by our friends here, and I'd like to be short, but to the core of the problem. Self-criticism, rule of law, democracy, dictatorship, corruption, everything was on the table. But let me tell you something. I was listening very carefully to President Macky Sall's remarks, and I recall the day I had visited him when he was president in the President's Palace, and I immediately reported to Brussels that there are leaders in Africa that they do not think only about the interests of their countries, but about Africa as a whole. So Africa's unity, I believe, must be built on shared interests and not on rhetorics. The key is to eliminate rivalry, but to manage it through common institutions, and the African Union can play a role there. The African Union has a central role as a political anchor of continental coordination, helping translate diversity into common strategy, a real, genuine African strategy. Economic interdependence is essential. A continent that trades little with itself negotiates from weakness, and this is the reality in Africa. The African Union must be empowered in order to articulate common positions on trade, debt, climate, it was said before, peace, and institutional reforms. Africa does not need unanimity on everything, but it does need coordination on core priorities, priorities that will be defined on a common strategic plan for the whole continent. Conflict prevention and crisis management, supported by African Union mechanisms, are vital to preserve continental cohesion. One voice does not mean uniformity. It is impossible. Africa, yes, can be united, but at the same time is divided. Not necessarily by ethnical rivalries, but by tribal rivalries. I have witnessed it myself once I was, I will not name the country, in order to talk about migration, in order for some of them to go back to their country. And they were not recognizing their own citizens. Africa's strength, dear friends, will come from integration, a stronger African Union, and strategic self-confidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitris. And now we go right away to Joseph.
I'll just take 30 seconds to say that Dimitris said the magic word, integration. Today we heard various speakers saying Africa is not one, as if, and I take it, obviously, it's not one, as Europe is not one. It's different countries, but the fact that we refer ourselves with common goals, I think it's very important. I think that that's the next big frontier for Africa. Integration and thinking, not the same, but thinking about common goals beyond the regional groupings as ECOWAS and so on. And I think this is necessary, because unless this happens, I think we're in for a new phenomenon, which is an increased inequality, not between Africa and the rest of the world, but within Africa itself, where the phenomenon of, say, migration and social inequality will be more and more gruesome as it will hit more than today. Obviously, there is inter-African migration, say, between Zimbabwe and Botswana, which we don't even appreciate within Europe, and which leads to social tensions. Thinking not as one Africa with common goals will probably in the future, as some of the African countries run at the front in economic and social advancement, create tensions that will be difficult to manage. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Charles?
Thank you. I see three major points: investments, governance, and partners, reliable and sincere partners. These are the three major points. And I agree on the fact that Africa has a lot of strength today. But I would like to react on one point. When we were talking about the processing, I remember about 20 years ago, at that time, I was Minister for International Cooperation in Belgium, and already at that time, it was a topic, it was a debate. How is it possible not only to export the resources, but to process and to create added value in Africa? And the question is why, 20 years later, we still ask the same question? I have my modest answer. I think that there's a topic related to governance. And governance is not democracy. That's not the same thing. I'm not here advocating for a certain form of democracy. Governance means that you want to provide stability, that you want to provide predictability, and you do not allow a small group of people, a minority of people, to get rich very fast, because the system allows a small group of people to get very rich very fast. And it's a topic that must be addressed not by the Europeans, not by other parts of the world, but the topic, I think, for the African leadership. And my last point, you need reliable partners. I'm very proud, together with you, dear President Macky Sall, that, for instance, when you were in charge at the level of the African Union, you advocated a lot for Africa being member of the G20, and immediately we support it, and Africa today is G20 member. One last point, you need investments. I fully support what was said by you, President Macky Sall, but on top, you have additional tools and capabilities. When you will mobilize even more the continental trade area, it will represent a lot of money that will be invested in the integration of Africa. When you use the carbon markets, what Kenya is doing very well, you have developed some regulation to encourage the carbon markets. There's also a way to have more money to invest in energy infrastructure, in connectivity, and improving the conditions of life of your people to be more attractive. There was one question very quickly, very fast on the Sahel region, and did we learn our lesson within the EU? Just an anecdote. When we launched this summit together with Michel, I remember that my will, my choice, because I wanted to listen to my friends in Africa, was not to follow the business as usual bureaucratic European approach. And what is the usual bureaucratic European approach? The bureaucracy in Brussels, we prepare 100 pages of text and we send the text to the African partners. That's not the process we follow. We wanted to work together, to listen to each other, to respect each other. And by the way, it was the occasion for me to understand this challenge, gas in transition in Africa, the point you made, and together with you, we managed to adapt the political position at the EU level because we understood, because you used the right argument, and it was convincing that it was indeed needed to show respect and to show also understanding for the specific situations in which the African continent was facing this climate change challenge. In one word, I'm optimistic. There are a lot of strengths, and I'm certain that the future will be more hopeful and more optimistic for the African continent and for the world.
And I am not going to add anything to those last words because I think this is a wonderful way to end this session. Thank you all very, very much.